June 12, 1944. The sky above the English Channel shudders like a sheet of metal being hammered without pause. Inside a cramped steel cockpit, a man sits frozen in place, his back pressed into the seat, both hands gripping the control stick, slick with sweat. The air around him grows hotter by the second, not from fire, but from pressure and the relentless roar behind his spine. Every vibration travels straight through his bones, teeth knocking together beyond his control. A dim red light washes over the instrument panel. The needles fluctuate erratically. A short, dry sound, like metal tearing itself apart, echoes through the fuselage. There is no time to think, no time to understand where this moment fits in any larger picture. There is only one sensation, brutally clear. If whatever is burning behind him keeps running for a few seconds longer, everything ends. The air is thick with the smell of oil and heated smoke. His ears ring as if he has been forced deep underwater. He feels a stronger vibration, off rhythm, followed by a terrifying instant of silence. The kind of pause the human body understands immediately, even before the mind can name it. This is not a moment for heroism. This is the moment when a vast system pushes a single human being to its absolute limit. What pushed that man to the edge was not a random mistake. It was the outcome of a design once praised as being ahead of its time, calculated down to precise figures and technical specifications. On paper, this was a perfect weapon, faster than anything it would face, stronger than every existing defensive concept. And yet, here lies the paradox. It never functioned the way it was imagined. The problem was not a lack of technology. It was not a shortage of courage. This system failed because war does not take place inside laboratories. It happens in rain, in constant vibration, in the smallest imperfections of metal and exhausted human bodies. This is not a story about power. This is a story about the deadly gap between flawless theory and unforgiving reality. To understand why that man was pushed into that moment, we have to rewind several years, to a phase of the war where speed itself became a matter of survival. Cities were being bombed night after night. Production chains were stretched to their breaking point. Decisions were no longer measured in months, but in weeks, sometimes days. At the political level, the pressure was to reverse the situation as quickly as possible. At the military level, the question was no longer whether to take risks, but how long collapse could be delayed without them. Time had become the enemy. Existing weapon systems could no longer keep up with new demands. Defenses grew denser, the skies grew more lethal. There were no perfect options on the table. Continuing with familiar methods meant accepting losses that would rise steadily and irreversibly. Attempting something entirely new carried the risk of catastrophic failure, not just technical but psychological and logistical. Inside conference rooms and design offices, decisions were made with incomplete information, limited testing, and overwhelming pressure. Every proposal was a gamble. Doing nothing meant accepting slow strangulation. Doing the unproven meant betting the lives of the people who would have to operate it in real conditions. The system was no longer searching for safety. It was searching for an exit, however fragile. It was under these conditions that a bold design was pushed from drawing board to production line faster than any peacetime standard would allow, not because it was ready, but because there was no longer time to wait for readiness. On the drawing board, everything looked clean and rational. A completely new propulsion system, promising unprecedented speed, was grafted onto an airframe designed for an older world. Theory suggested that once a certain velocity was reached, every previous concept of air defense would become obsolete. But once production began, the elegant numbers on paper collided immediately with the rough realities of wartime industry. The engine required heat-resistant alloys that the industrial system could not supply consistently. Each internal blade demanded extremely tight tolerances, yet workers were operating under conditions of power shortages, material scarcity, and chronic exhaustion. A deviation almost invisible during manufacturing translated into exponentially increasing vibration during operation. On a test stand, such issues could be corrected. In the air, they became a direct threat to the person sitting in front of the machine. The operating procedure was more complex than anything that had come before it. Start the system too aggressively and it would destroy itself. Start it too slowly and it became an easy target. Temperature had to rise along a precisely defined curve, but the battlefield never allowed such precision. A slight change in weather, altitude, or human reaction was enough to collapse the entire fragile balance. Meanwhile, logistics failed to keep pace with technical ambition. The fuel required special refining. Spare parts were never sufficient. Every malfunction was not just a mechanical issue, but a new dilemma for entire units: repair or abandon, wait or risk everything. Temporary fixes became common, reinforcements made with substandard materials, inspection procedures shortened, risk thresholds raised beyond acceptable limits. On paper, this remained a weapon of the future. In reality, it was being kept alive by an unbroken chain of compromises. On the design side, the engineers saw the problems clearly. They understood that the system needed more time to mature, more test cycles, more controlled failures. But time was no longer a technical variable. It had become a political one. Every week of delay meant losses continuing to rise elsewhere. Warnings were written down, then softened as they passed through layers of management. At the executive level, what mattered was not vibration or material fatigue, but production charts. A funded assembly line could not stand still. A promised project could not be withdrawn. Pressure turned technically optimal decisions into choices that accepted real-world risk. Safety margins were adjusted, not because they were wrong, but because they were deemed incompatible with the situation. Those who bore the full weight of this mismatch were the operators. They were trained on a system that was still unstable, with procedures that changed constantly. Each sortie was not just a mission, but a live experiment. They learned to sense with their bodies what sensors failed to detect. An unfamiliar sound, an irregular vibration, a gauge lagging by half a second. These were the boundaries between returning and not. When failures occurred, they rarely had a single cause. A heat-resistant component degraded faster than expected. A maintenance routine shortened due to a lack of spare parts. A takeoff approved under less than ideal conditions. Each factor alone was acceptable. Together, they formed a chain of failure that no single person truly controlled. This system did not collapse because of one fatal flaw. It was worn down by hundreds of small compromises made by people who all believed they were doing what was most necessary in a situation without real choices. Within this entire machine, no one truly felt like the center. Engineers lived under prolonged tension, forced to fix problems while answering questions they could never answer with complete honesty. They understood the limits of metal, temperature, and probability. But they also knew that every additional warning placed into a report could brand the project as slow or indecisive. Their exhaustion did not come from physical labor, but from constantly choosing between what was technically correct and what was systemically acceptable. On the production lines, workers operated at a pace that allowed no mistakes and no real rest. The components they assembled would never be seen again. None of them could observe the full picture. They only knew that with each passing day, output demands increased, while materials and time did not. As for the operators, they had no privilege to doubt the system. All they possessed was personal experience and reflexes sharpened by near failures. Stress did not erupt into heroism, but into small survival decisions, postponing a mission, aborting a takeoff, or continuing despite the body signaling that something was wrong. None of them believed they were making history. They were simply trying to survive one more day inside a machine that had never been designed to care about human limits. The cost of this system did not appear in a single moment. It accumulated over time. It was recorded in figures that never appeared side by side in the same report. Flight hours cut short. Missions aborted mid-execution, airframes written off before completing their intended service life. Each individual incident could be explained. Together, they formed a level of loss no original plan had ever accounted for. Accidents did not occur only in combat. They happened during testing, during training, during transport. Systems designed to alter the course of war consumed resources in quieter, less visible ways. Every mechanical failure meant not only the loss of scarce materials, but the loss of time, the one resource that could not be replaced. Repair chains grew longer, placing additional strain on logistics that were already fragile. The human cost was harder to measure. Not all of it was recorded as official losses. Some operators were no longer able to continue. Some mistakes left permanent physical or psychological damage. The system did not collapse overnight, but it began to pay through a gradual erosion of trust in the machine, in procedures, and in the assurances that all risks were under control. In hindsight, this was not a sudden failure. It was the result of a long sequence of decisions made under sustained emergency conditions, where each choice was rational at the moment it was signed, yet together created a debt the system eventually had to repay. When this system was finally deployed at a scale large enough to matter, the outcome did not match what its original designs had promised. It did not transform the war overnight. It did not create absolute superiority. Instead, it existed as a specialized tool, effective only under a narrow set of conditions that war rarely provided. Some missions succeeded, others were aborted before reaching their objective. Later refinements reduced certain risks, but never eliminated the core weaknesses. The system did not disappear, yet it never became the central pillar it was meant to be. It was used cautiously, selectively, always accompanied by unspoken limitations that no manual could fully capture. As the war approached its end, the project concluded not with celebration, but with silence. It left behind a vast body of technical experience and a lingering sense that what had been created never truly belonged to the environment it was built to serve. Decades later, this story no longer belongs only to wartime history. It has become a familiar pattern wherever technology is pushed faster than human systems can absorb. Under extreme time pressure, complex systems tend to be fielded before they are truly ready. Risks are accepted not because they are small, but because alternatives no longer exist. In the modern world, from heavy industry to global supply chains, from military technology to civilian infrastructure, the same paradox persists. Models grow more precise, yet real environments remain unpredictable. Humans still operate machines while exhausted, underinformed, and constrained by decisions made far above them. The lesson is not about rejecting new technology. It is about understanding that no design is immune to reality, and every system, no matter how advanced, carries the limits of the people who build it and the people who must live inside it. History is not decided by the moment a weapon fires, but by the technical and systemic problems solved in desperation behind it. Wars are rarely won by what is strongest, but by what deviates the least from reality.